walking around and no, I kid you not, there's just Kim Kardashian walking. You're just like, what the heck?
What? Welcome to KKC Consulting, a podcast where I speak to industry experts to bring you advice for breaking into your career. Today, we welcome Viraj, renowned for his role as the youngest intern ever at the White House. Now, Viraj, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Of course, Omar, thank you so much for having me. Hope finals are doing well. But of course, I'm happy to be on here and chat about everything that I've learned over the process.
Of course, of course. Thank you so much. Now, Viraj, do you mind giving a little bit of synopsis about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So, as you know, previously interned at the White House, I have experiences across multiple different avenues. I started out very, very younger, I'd say. Not to date myself here, but during the COVID-19 pandemic when I was in high school. And so I wanted to understand in the ways when my communities that I was a part of were being affected, that I could help understand and better amplify the people there that had seen a marginalization and seen issues that have not been voiced by community leaders. And so
Right,
I look to think about what are some of the ways that people, especially in this space, are not understanding the ways that they have a voice, understanding the ways in which students can be effective policymakers, even if they don't think so. I mean, especially for me, I started out in the space when I was 15, 3 years away before I could even have the chance to vote. Yet I
wow.
still thought that especially policy leaders, especially people in the space, had a gap with understanding the reign of how teenagers really work and understanding more to that, how people actually work in the school system. And so, in multiple campaigns and multiple policies, I streamlined what I wanted to do in the space of policy over through campaigns, working on education equity, which got me finally to now working in the space of advocacy for college
Mhm.
students, better equipping and uplifting students who have a sense of education equity and getting them to spaces where they can actually see themselves succeeding in a career that they haven't seen anybody else in their family in. So enabling first generation college students, enabling people with non-traditional backgrounds and
Right.
enabling people from low income backgrounds to pursue college at a higher education standpoint through not just my own content creation, but also through working with organizations like the UC Student Association and beyond.
Right. Fantastic. Thank you so much for providing that. You mentioned it a little bit about your hobbies and interests, but do you mind going a little bit more in depth about, how your hobbies and interests transformed your career progression?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've always been, I would say, very much a creative, and I didn't realize like in which ways that I was a creative. And I think that, I looked at the ways in which I interpreted the world. I was always very, very interested in understanding people's stories. I was
Mhm.
captivated by how people overcame a certain tasks. What I've always loved in my life is an underdog story, whether that
Right.
be in any reign in your life, that being a guy coming from a non-target school and you're turning at the most productive company in the world, or that being somebody who's just gone through all the hardships to get to their degree. And so what has really captivated me is helping amplify underdogs to get to where they want to be. And so one of the ways I've done that is just through my own content creation, being able to amplify people's careers, but also help people get to where they want to be. And one of those hobbies, especially, I think that's the biggest one, content creation, has helped me understand more about how can I better understand the ways in which I'm passionate about amplifying people and what ways in which these people's stories can affect one another. Because you can inspire somebody and that person can then go on to tell their friend, and that person can inspire the
Right.
next person. And it's almost like a domino effect. And so I think that hobby, not even like a hobby, but honestly like a passion of mine has really cultivated myself and not only being able to understand how to storytell people and how to really make sure that people understand and value what you're saying in a space, especially when you're the youngest intern that's ever interned in the space, but two, to also understand how can you best understand a person from where they're coming from and use that to help them in a way that's going to get them to where they need to be. And
Right.
so that's just helped me not just in my space of hobbies and who I am as a person, but also just who I aspire to be too.
Of course. And I feel one of the reasons we connected so easily is because we both have that why for helping other people, right? At the end of the day, the goal is to help as many people as possible. And you mentioned it is like a domino effect. It is when you help one person, if that person helps someone else, that person helps someone else. It's like a full circle that at the end of the day, is going to help you because you're going to feel better about yourself, right?
Exactly.
And mhm. Now jumping on, massive switch, but talk to me about your experience at the White House.
Yeah. I think that's the probably the most transformative experience I've had, especially in such a short time frame, coming in as not only the youngest intern they ever had, but also coming in as somebody who's never been to the East Coast of the United States in my life. My
I
first time
see.
making a huge move, I was 3,000 away. I was 3,000 miles away from everybody I knew on the face of the earth. And so it was just very, very different. And I had a lot of changes. I had a lot of understanding about, you know, for the first time in my life, I had to understand, where do I actually go to get groceries now that I'm not at college, I'm not at school. How do I make friends in a space where I can go to a bar? And so it's like when this culture is defined and you have to understand how do you mold and adapt, but also keep the parts of yourself that are most, um, you have to keep the parts of yourself that have the most authenticity. It's understanding that balance and difference. And so when I came to the White House, I was understanding that, you know, firstly, I came out and you would be, one of the more underaccomplished people. I'd be one of the people who maybe doesn't have the most experience. Maybe
Mhm.
I come in with some more youthful charisma. At the same time, when I actually came in, though, I realized how behind I was from my peers who had literally went on to work at companies like McKinsey, Google, Amazon, and companies that have or been able to work on policy that has literally transformed people's lives. And so I had to understand that even though I was in the space, I still had a lot to offer. And I maybe had to outwork some of my peers, but I still had more to give. I still had more to
Mhm.
be able to, I still had more to understand as well.
You
And
had a
then
different
also
angle,
understand.
right?
Exactly. It's like a different perspective almost. But like, sure, some people might have it easier because they've already gone through certain experiences, but this is the one experience going to transform you to maybe somebody who can then inspire the people and then work on helping and developing myself in a way that other people can benefit from my story.
Right.
So that was probably the most pivotal thing. I think it's also understanding that the White House and all the ways that the media has brought it to me is exactly the same way that you would think it is outside of there. It's
Mhm.
very hectic, but it's also not as organized as you think. There's many
I
people
see.
who are doing things and creating policy and adjusting to things that are happening spontaneously. And so people are stressed out, people are burnt out, people are not as, I want to say, it's
Uptight.
much more humanistic than you would think.
Hmm.
And so people are coming into the space, they have their own problems. And it really brought to the sense to me that even though people have these titles, at the end of the day, they're still human. They still have
Right.
24 hours in the day. They still have probably skipped their lunch because they had so much work to do. They've probably been glued to their butts on that chair since 8 a.m. And so it brought a sense of empathy to the people that I was working with and the people that I used to pedestalize before I came to internship as well. And so I think those 3 points really captured my experience. I mean, it was the most transformative thing I've done, but it really gave me the better sense of leading with empathy and understanding that people in whatever space you're in are still people and that there's always good people around you.
Right. Talk to me about some of the cool stuff that you did at White House, for lack of better terms, because I know such a crazy internship. There's obviously going to be challenges, responsibilities, but there's going to be a shit ton of cool stuff as well. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, most definitely. For me, the biggest thing that I found, the coolest thing I found was that you just be walking around at like 12 p.m. on like a Tuesday, and no, I kid you not, there's just Kim Kardashian walking. You're just like, what the heck?
What?
Yeah, there's randomly, I remember like it was like a Thursday or like a Tuesday, and I just kind of saw Kim K walking because she was gonna meet the
That's
VP. And you just kind of think to yourself like,
yo, that's
dude,
crazy.
this is like I'm in the space with these people. And
Hmm.
even though like, Kim K's put on like a pedestal, you still see these people as just like your peers and people that are just walking by.
Hmm.
You put these people on like a silver platter and then like, man, these people are like all the way up top. But you realize a lot of these people are just like human. They're probably like underslept, or sleep deprived rather. They probably haven't eaten in like a while, have a good breakfast. So there is that sense of almost sonder. I'd say the second point to that, the biggest thing and the coolest thing was being able to meet the leaders that I've been inspired by
Right.
for so long. I mean, I got to meet the president, got to meet the vice president, got to talk a bit with them. So talking about like how they have captivated their experiences, what really led them to this point, but also seeing that even though they've been through this entire journey, that they're still the same persons, and especially on what you see in TV, they're still the same people you see on TV, especially President Biden. He was the exact same person, I'd say, still the same youthful
Mhm.
charisma, as you'd say. He still had the same level of wittiness. He was still a cool guy, and I think that was what most surprising to me, because I think what I've seen throughout just these prestigious places that you put people on a pedestal and you just
Mhm.
realize like, hey, these people are cooler than you think. I think
Right.
also the coolest thing was also just getting, well, every day I'd come into the White House and I'd have to flash a badge to get in, and that badge would grant me access through the fact that literally there'd be Secret Service sitting right up front of the gate to enter the White House, and they
Yeah.
just let me in. And
Wow.
so it's like you have this almost like, not to say aura, but you'd be literally let in. All these like tourists be watching
Yeah.
you come in while you look like 3,000 years younger than them too. So there's also the whole part where like I look like I'm 18 years old because I was. And then you come in and you're just like, I get let in. It's like, what? What is this guy doing here? What is
Yeah,
look
yeah.
like, man, what am I doing with my life? So there's all the whole thing where it's like it kind of feels cool to flash my badge and walk through his tour.
Mhm.
It's like, oh man, look at me. I got all this cool status. But I'd say that's the coolest thing, like meeting these people and realizing they're just human, and then realizing that like maybe some people think I'm not human by walking into the space. So there's that.
Oh, that's sick. I mean, you've done so many impressive things. Obviously, the White House, but something else I wanted to touch base on. Obviously, super hard getting into the White House, but getting in from a non-target school, even more impressive, right? So tell me more about how you were able to do that. Youngest White House intern, even being a White House intern and coming from a non-target school, impressive stuff.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was I had a goal in mind, and I wanted to be a White House intern since actually middle school. I had a goal in my
Wow.
mind. I'd watched like the Trump House administration's interns. I watched some of the more, I'd say, elusive stuff that they put on, about like the lack of diversity. And so I was like, oh man, this internship does sound cool. I also watched, going into my college years, I watched some of the tapes from the Obama administration about how Obama interacted with his interns as well. And to me, it felt like an experience that every single person in the room was willing to give it 100% of what they were wanting to give, no matter where they were. Like if they were 18 years old or 28 years old, they had literally like three kids and a wife. They were so willing to give 100% to it because they knew this experience would be next to none. And so I
Mhm.
knew I had to give it all next to none to get to this space. And
Right.
so the biggest thing for me was knowing that I had strengths. It's just the way that I sold these strengths and the way that I connected with people to even get my foot in the door. And so what
Mhm.
I did is that I firstly utilized, I went to the University of California, and through the University of California system, they have a system called University of Cal or UCDC, which is essentially a semester or slash quarter in Washington program. And this program essentially has connections to people all across different workplaces in DC. And so what I did is that I reached out to my advisor on my campus to connect me with people who had worked at the White House. Only after, of course, I'd have a good relationship with them and they had trust in me,
Mhm.
but leverage that person to get me in front of the door of people at the White House. Once they connect me with people at the White House, I then use that and leverage that to develop a really good relationship with them and just tell them upfront, like I'm willing to do whatever I want to work here, and this is the place where I want to see myself, potentially later down the line as well.
Mhm.
I explained my story and I resonated with a lot of the people who had been in these spaces. And from there, it was a matter of course, seeing if they could connect me to people and then researching more and more and more about the offices that I wanted to work in so that I had enough leverage to tell people like, hey, I know that I want to work for this office in the OMB doing this work with this team. Because majority of the interns that are applying, sure, they're competitive, they have all these applications, they have all these internships, but they maybe haven't done that research to understand
Right.
exactly what the team does. And so you have that leg up over these people.
Mhm.
Second, you also want to leverage the fact that you've been able to contribute in whatever way you've been able to, through, of course, through storytelling, but also just through quantifying your impact too. And so I really made sure to triple, double every down on my resume and made sure it was the best thing I could think of. And so I had my resume reviewed about 25 times before I submitted
Wow.
my application. And so I had that reviewed by everybody on the UCDC program. I'd reviewed by my peers, my professors. And then when it came to I think the most important part was the essays that you wrote. Now, the
Mhm.
essays, there's about three essays. And one of them was about how you have personally, like one of them was about your cover letter and essentially like
Mhm.
your explanation, your story. One of them, however, was about a policy goal or policy initiative that the Biden administration was not working on, that you as an individual had expertise in, that you can then amplify for the administration. Then the
Mhm.
final essay prompt was, how does what is the one mistake that you see the Biden administration making, and how would you change that as an intern? So I answered all three of those prompts. I mentioned specifically as a content creator how creators were the best way to reach the youth and millennials and Gen Z
True.
of America. And so I told them in my essay specifically that the White House should do more to connect creators with the administration and amplify their policy goals on a more streamlined platform. And
Mhm.
so they already had an offset digital strategy, but amplifying that and actually getting creators to the White House, getting them to actually speak to people who are representatives, get them to just experience what it is to actually be at the highest point of governance was how I structured my essay. And I think that was the one key point because as a creator, I was able to speak on that as a person who's also went through the process as well. So I think that's what got me moved on to the first round of interviews. For my then 5 rounds of interviews, I had a phone screening, a behavioral
Wow.
interview, I had a case interview, I had a confirming interview, then I had a team interview, which essentially like what team you want to be placed on. And
Wow.
so, though preparing for those relied a lot on doing as much research as I could, but also finding, honestly, just trusting my gut and preparing as much as I could for resources that I thought would be applicable because a lot of the White House internship materials aren't as publicly available. And
Mhm.
so you had to trust your gut a lot. You also had to be able to ask questions in a way in the interview that demonstrated your knowledge prior to coming into the space. And so for me, that was actually doing research on these people beforehand, not about what they do, what their experience has been, but more importantly, what their path has been before they came to the White House. Because a lot of the
Oh,
people
right.
will go through multiple career experiences and they then end up at the White House. It's very uncommon for someone, especially like my age, to come into the space very early on. And so
Mhm.
you want to articulate how your career experiences align with their career experiences, almost like you're a perfect match for that person's career experiences and what they've had. And so if they've worked in the space of healthcare, you can talk about what healthcare policy that you've done in your maybe high school tenure or your freshman year of college and how you execute that. And so finding points to resonate with that seem like your background is almost meant to be was the key, also another key pivotal point
Right.
as well. So that would be my three biggest things: researching, I would say, um, creating, and reviewing. Those are my three things, and I think that's what really may stand out from the 99% of people that applied in previous
Mhm.
years.
It's fantastic. One thing I did want to touch base on, you mentioned earlier about building relationships with, the VP, the president. How are you able to do that without getting super nervous, right? As an 18-year-old, that's daunting. So tell me more about that as well.
Yeah, I think that kind of comes back to my latter point where you put these people on like a pedestal,
Mhm.
and then you realize that, they were probably the same when they were my age. I'm 18, 19,
Right,
20 years
right.
old. I am very, very eager to learn, sure, but I'm also probably pretty nervous because I've literally never been, well, not one in DC, never been to the White House. You have all these things that you've never done, and so you feel a point of being, you feel very uncomfortable. But then I kind of come back to like the point that I've kind of led my life of growth, or at least how I've tried to approach growth with, where, you won't get growth does not come from being comfortable. And so you want to be uncomfortable being uncomfortable. And so I literally in these moments I thought to myself, man, I'm only getting this shot once.
Right.
I've My parents have worked super hard to come here as a first
Mhm.
generation immigrant. Their parents have worked out super, super hard. They've never got this opportunity, but I do.
Mhm.
And so it's literally taking a step back, thinking about where you came from, thinking about like, hey, like was 0.00001% of people get this opportunity?
Mhm.
Why would I mess this up? And so
Exactly.
to put it in very simple terms, I had to lock in and understand how do I structure my thoughts in a way that is most transformative. And sometimes it's even literally just taking a second to think about your thoughts and just taking a second, breathing, then thinking again. Sometimes I even struggle with this myself, but doing that and doing it in a way that the president and the vice president or whoever understands that and empathizes with that too, because they've been there as well.
Mhm. 100%. It's so fantastic how you're able to recognize, yo, I have this opportunity. I can't waste it, right? It's not. maybe I can waste it, maybe like I'm half there, like you're 100% locked in. And I feel that's what a lot of people struggle with, myself included, right? We sometimes take advantage of the blessings that we have, and we don't put in as much effort as we should just because we take advantage of it or we take it for granted, for better terms, right? And I'm glad you were able to lock in, find out your dream, move on to the interview phases. And that leads me to my next follow-up question. 5 interviews is crazy. So tell me about that, man.
Yeah, I think the 5 minute benchmark, I think it's more, it's not as, especially now going through consulting interviews, it isn't as difficult as it seems because I've gone through like 11 days of interview, 11 rounds of interviews, and that's been like pretty crazy.
Wow.
That's a whole nother story. I think
Yeah.
this 5 interviews, I really felt like, even though it sounds like a lot, it went through really, really fast and went through really, really quick. I think partly because I realized, especially for me, that if you've already done the research, you've already done the work, there's nothing you should be afraid of.
Right.
And if you've already done the research, you've already outworked your competitors, then all you need to do is just show up, show face, and put your best foot out there. And
Mhm.
so relying on myself to think about that was the biggest thing, that the fact that like I've done the work, I've done everything, now it's time to just show up and kill the game. I think the
Right.
second thing that I really prepared a lot with was just understanding the values of the administration and specifically like that sub-administration and like really honing in like what do people here actually value a part of this administration? Because there's people who, quite frankly, in the government, even at the White House, people make much, much less than what they would if they went to the private sector. They probably take like a 75% pay cut, some people even
Wow.
what they would be getting if they worked in the private sector. Because some people,
Mhm.
especially, they are very, very senior leaders and they're like the equivalent of like a partner at a consulting firm or like a MD or like a senior VP, almost to say. So these people are the people I'm working with, and they are at that level. And so it's understanding what level of magnitude of service do they have that they're so committed to take that pay cut and put themselves in the position, but two, to also understand that these people specifically are just so bought into that mission that they're willing to do that, not just for themselves, but they're also even willing to take a pay cut for the people they care about, like their family, if they have any kids,
Mhm.
their relatives as well. And so it's like taking that situation, understanding like they're so bought into that. So understanding that I also value equally as much as you do about this administration, about what they value
Mhm.
and how I, as a person's core ethos, aligns with your core ethos as well, because of what this administration has done for me, what I identify as, and what I value in the context of American policy, but also just my own people that I value, like my family, my friends, etc. So I think that was the biggest thing, really making sure I sold that. And then two, also just connecting with the interviewer, which everyone says to do. It's much harder when you're actually there and you have 30 minutes to talk to the person and you have 12 interview questions to think about. But lately thinking to myself that I also should always focus on connection over than completion, right? I can always complete an interview. I'll be done with interview in 30 minutes, but it's how I utilize the 30 minutes to connect with the person, either that by coming in with a smile on my face and asking the interviewer how their day has been and just really, really trying to get to know the person as opposed to just answering the questions like a robot was also super, super instrumental too. So
Mhm.
both those key points I'd say really helped me just make myself stand out, but also just feel much more comfortable when interviewing because I knew that I had align myself with the person. I'd done everything I could to get myself to at least be in that spot. And then three, to be in the space where I am able to contribute to that person's day in a positive manner. Because if they had a conversation with a person that they think is valuable, I think is actually someone they want to have on the team, and there's no point in not having that person on the team.
Right. I feel showing your passion and being able to align it with someone else is so, so, so important. Even with the podcast, what I like to do is obviously it's very important to ask really good questions, but I like to talk about something that the guest wants to talk about, right? So then in that sense, I'm able to connect with them. And alhamdulillah, it's been working quite well. Even reaching out on LinkedIn, whenever you speak to people, I feel a lot of people forget they're human too. Like you mentioned earlier on with the whole White House scenario, and they want to be treated as a human. They like to laugh, they like to smile, whatever else that might be. And I feel you've been able to captivate that very, very well. That's one of the Many amazing things about you. Another amazing thing that I wanted to jump on, apart from the White House, you were a finance transformation intern at Deloitte. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, I'd say it was a very different pivot because I literally did my Microsoft internship. Then like 2 weeks after I started my Deloitte internship, so it was like a whole complete 180 on the literally the
Wow.
other side of America. I went from DC to San Francisco, so that's
Yeah.
literally like a whole trek there. So that was huge. I think that honestly, going from Deloitte to the White House or from the White House to Deloitte,
Mhm.
it was a lot much less of a I would say much less of a learning curve because I've already been through such a transformative experience through
Mhm.
networking, through getting my foot in the door that when I recruited for the internship, I was already in my White House internship. So like I'd already been going through the uncomfortability. And so it was much easier for me to just be able to articulate my thoughts, do my case interviews, and just be able to connect with the interviewer. I would also say that once I got there, my workload was, of course, much less. I did not have to work
Right.
weekends. I didn't have to work, upwards of 80 hours a week. That was much easier for me. I
Wow.
did have to, however, travel a bit for my internships. That was actually one of the preferences I had. I got to travel to some cool cities. I went around San Francisco. I went to like on-sites for pretty cool companies. Went all the way to Texas as well. Went across the East Coast. And I got to also be able to experience kind of the whole 180 of what the private sector is like, because you can see how, working at the White House and working with people who are like 2 or 3 times older than you, even sometimes, how that kind of affects your work style and how you approach things. But working with people who have literally graduated like 3 years ago, who literally have almost, you know, who have just moved to the city, people who are in much similar shoes as you, how that duality, but also how you can use that to empathize with different experiences coming into the space. Because I think corporate and I think consulting as a whole is much more streamlined than a White House internship because
Right.
you are not forced to be able to advocate for yourself as much. Because I had to advocate to get into the space, I had to advocate to get all the work that I got. I had to advocate for me to be able to be heard in any space. While in Deloitte, there's almost this sense of camaraderie where you have to hear the intern's perspective and you have to understand them from where they're coming from just because they're the intern. And so they have this badge on themselves, like, hey, I'm the intern. I have this sort of righteous privilege. While in the White House, it was there, but it wasn't as prominent as it was at Deloitte, mainly because of the
Right.
ratio interns to full-time was also much higher at Deloitte too. That was the biggest thing. I'd also say that I did get a chance to connect with my intern friends a lot more. I think quite frankly because I didn't feel a sense of imposter syndrome. There's a lot of interns, and I think now looking back at my White House internship, a lot of the interns were also just in a different phase of life than I was, so it was a bit hard for me to connect with them. But everyone in this internship was about like maybe 1 or 2 years either side of me. So like either 18 years old or either like 20, 21 years old. So it was like the whole duality to think about. I think that was really helpful to have people who can relate to you in your scenarios. It's also helpful to have people who have almost gone through the same experience as you in the sense of going through college, going through, the whole Gen Zs, being able to talk about the things that
Right.
you value. If I scroll on TikTok and I
Yeah,
find out
yeah.
that my friends in my internship are able to understand that, now my supervisor who has a kid that's literally older than me. So there is that. So I think overall, I think I had a much more of a fun summer and I enjoyed my internship experience, but I didn't grow as much as I say I would from the White
Mhm.
House internship. I didn't challenge myself. I didn't feel challenged as much as I did in the White House internship for sure.
That's fair, 100%. I feel being able to connect with peers, friends, associates, whatever you might call them, who are close to you in age, it's amazing, man. Like some of my mentors, they might be 4 or 5 years older than me, but the way we can connect, whether it's boxing, Muay Thai, like Islam as well. There's so many different ways we can connect and just laugh about things. It makes things so much more special than speaking to someone who's like 8, 9, 10 years older than me, and it might just be a little bit more difficult to find that sweet spot between professionalism and just casualness, right? But I feel you've been able to grasp that very, very nicely. And you even show that in your content creation, whether it's YouTube, LinkedIn, etc. And that's something else I wanted to talk about, actually. Tell me more about your whole YouTube and content creation journey.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this was the main thing for me because I actually took a gap year from school to work
I
on content
see.
creation. I think this motivation to take the gap year brings me all the way back to when I was 8 years old. Excuse me. back in 2020, no, 2012. Oh wow, I'm old. Back in 2012 when I was in my wee years of elementary school. But I used to make videos, I mean, just for the sake of it, about Minecraft, post dumb videos about, hacks in Minecraft, Herobrine sites, things like that. And so I was really drawn to just like posting things and like expressing myself in like a creative way because I knew that it was just something that I was drawn to, but also an avenue that I could feel comfortable expressing myself in a way that gives me a sense of purpose and allows me to be able to share my experience with other people who could resonate with those experiences as well, even if it's just dumb Minecraft videos. And so I did those same videos over the course. I focused on gaming up until I'd say even my ninth to my freshman year of high school. And so I transitioned away from Minecraft, worked on like Fortnite and Destiny 2 videos. Now you won't see any of those videos on my YouTube channel now because those are in a completely different era. But now I work mostly on democratizing careers for prospective students and people who want to be the best version of themselves. And
Mhm.
so I focus on two avenues, helping demystify certain things in certain careers, that being consulting, finance, investment banking, by interviewing professionals who have had those specific stories. So maybe interviewing, my last video was interviewing somebody who was a kinesiology major, graduated in 6 years instead of four from
Wow.
school, and then landed the internship and then full-time offer at Deloitte as a cyber strategy consultant. And so interviewing those
Oh,
people
interesting.
who have very, very honestly transformative experiences and then picking their brain to then use that as an avenue to demystify that for students who may be in a similar space or just very ambitious but don't know where to start. It's also a huge thing I'm doing. Secondly, to that point, also being able to share my own experiences, similar to what I'm doing right now, through what I've learned through my White House internship, what I've learned through my Deloitte internships, what I've learned from being, the youngest intern at these spaces, etc. And being able to speak about that in a way that is very clear and easy to understand so that people of all ages and skill sets can understand that. I think the main core ethos of all this, though, is just be able to resonate about what are some of the ways that I see gaps in the content I'm watching? Because quite frankly, I see a lot of content that's very self-serving, not really contributing to, you know, the honestly, the
Others.
I want to say the efficacy of other people, right? You want to be able to enable people to have that confidence to go and pursue that internship, not to for them to realize like, hey, Viraj is just so cool, I should follow him. It's not really
Mhm.
about, putting yourself on a pedestal, but putting yourself on a not only putting yourself on a pedal upright, one side, not putting yourself on a pedestal, but putting yourself lower down the totem pole to a space where you are not perceived as above, but you're perceived as part. And
Right.
being, I mean, it's a whole cliche phase of being a leader, not a boss. And you want to be
Mhm.
able to exemplify that in your content. You want to be exemplify that in whatever you do, because especially looking at the people that I idolize, they are the people who do not take themselves to heart, do not pedalize themselves. They're the people who consistently say they have not made it, the people who consistently say that they have not been the people who have, well, they've not been the
Other.
people to be in that space where they feel like they have been able to transform enough people's lives because they can always do more. And so
Mhm.
that's what I've been seeing from the most influential people. And so that's the approach I want to take from my content that I'm going to continue to take from how I create content in the future.
Right. Now, really quickly, a very quick disclaimer. Please, please, please go check out Viraj's YouTube channel. It's absolutely amazing. Over 200,000 views across all videos. Absolutely fantastic work. The link is also in the description. But moving on to what you were saying earlier on, I really feel helping others is essentially helping yourself, right? You said that you want to empower others and being able to have that platform where you're interviewing random people, being able to learn about their journey, and other people can just capture whatever is important for them and improve as a result from that. It's kudos to you. It's fantastic. Another thing I wanted to talk about is your journey getting into the whole content creation. I can resonate a little bit with it because I'll be honest with you, one of the main inspirations I had, believe it or not, is Beta Squad. They're some YouTubers from the UK. Watching their pranks, watching the drive-through pranks, man, I used to laugh so much that like tears would come down my eyes. Being able to look at that, and I always used to tell my boys, "Yo, we should start a podcast. We should talk about things and blow up, right? We're so funny." All those things. Obviously, I was way too young and the humor wasn't the best, right? But being able to look at other people and understand, you know what, I can do the same thing as him or her, rather than saying, oh, he's too far above me, I can't really do that. And I think you did an excellent job in fixating that upon your viewers as well. So great job, man.
Yeah.
Now, moving on, I did want to touch on some professional advice. You have a very, very long journey and it's fantastic work. Talk to me about some of the most important advices you've received or that you can give.
So I would say my three biggest pieces of advice were is of course to one be very it's of course to be true to yourself, to
Mhm,
always understand that you are not going to be if to always understand that rule of thirds and to always research more about whatever you're putting out. And three, to also, of course, be okay being comfortable, being uncomfortable, very cliche, but you always should and always strive for whatever really strikes a level of fear in you because
mhm.
fear and especially being comfortable is what is the catalyst toward growth, at least in my experiences that I have had over the course of my very long lifetime.
100%. I can relate to that completely. Even starting this podcast, I'm very introverted. Being able to speak in front of a camera, it's hard. It's very, very hard learning all that. But Viraj, thank you so much for sharing all your insights. It was amazing and fantastic having you on the podcast. And as for you guys, please tune in for the new episodes of KKC Consulting, obviously every Friday, or if I'm lazy, maybe Saturday or Sunday. But thank you so much. Please feel free to subscribe and obviously check out Viraj's channel as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.